free health care. As examples, I'm not saying it.
Reparations should encompass a comprehensive range of measures aimed at addressing the economic, social, and systemic disadvantages faced by Black Americans due to centuries of enslavement and racial discrimination. Firstly, reparations should focus on the period of the transatlantic slave trade, a system of human exploitation that stained humanity's past, recognizing that millions of Africans were forcibly uprooted from their homelands, enduring unimaginable suffering and exploitation. It is crucial to recognize that the pain inflicted by slavery extends beyond its abolition. The era of Jim Crow laws, segregation, and ongoing racial discrimination has perpetuated inequality and hindered progress. Reparations should address these continued injustices, aiming to dismantle systemic racism and ensure equal protection under the law. While emancipation granted freedom to enslaved individuals, it did not erase the profound and far-reaching consequences of slavery. The scars left by centuries of economic plunder, psychological trauma, and systematic disenfranchisement continue to reverberate through generations and shape the experiences of Black Americans. Economic plunder was a central aspect of slavery, as the labor of enslaved individuals generated immense wealth for slaveholders and fueled the growth of industries. The exploitation of their labor created a vast economic disparity that persists to this day. Even after emancipation, Black Americans faced significant barriers in accessing economic opportunities, including limited access to land, capital, and education. This systemic disadvantage has perpetuated a cycle of economic inequality that has endured for generations. Moreover, the psychological trauma inflicted by slavery lingers in the collective consciousness. Enslaved individuals endured unimaginable suffering, witnessing the dehumanization of themselves and their loved ones. The psychological scars of slavery have been passed down through generations, manifesting as intergenerational trauma and impacting mental health, self-esteem, and identity formation. Arguing against reparations based solely on practicality overlooks the enduring reality of the deep-seated consequences of slavery. It is true that money alone cannot erase the haunting memories of the auction block, the sting of Jim Crow laws, or the echoes of police brutality. The wounds inflicted by systemic racism run far deeper than what money can address. However, reparations can play a crucial role in acknowledging historical injustices and providing tangible support to affected communities. While money cannot erase the painful past, it can provide resources and opportunities that can help begin the healing process. Reparations can contribute to economic empowerment, addressing the wealth disparities that have been perpetuated by generations of systemic discrimination. By investing in community development, healthcare, mental health resources, and legal support can address the enduring psychological trauma and provide much-needed assistance to those impacted by the legacy of slavery. The wealth created through the labor of enslaved individuals played a significant role in the development and prosperity of nations. However, Black communities were systematically excluded from benefiting from this wealth through policies like Jim Crow laws and redlining. These discriminatory practices denied them access to economic opportunities and hindered their ability to accumulate wealth. Consequently, this historical injustice continues to impact Black communities today, resulting in limited access to quality education and persistent wealth disparities. By embracing reparations, we strive to heal the wounds of the past, promote unity, and ensure a brighter future for everyone. In this case, reparations refer to efforts aimed at addressing the unpaid labor of enslaved Africans who were treated as property and brought to the English-American colonies. Their work was crucial in accumulating wealth for the United States, yet neither they nor their descendants benefited from it. Today, the goal of reparations plans is to provide compensation to the approximately 40 million descendants of the enslaved. The various forms that reparations can take include health and well-being, addressing the disparities in healthcare access and outcomes by investing in healthcare programs and services for communities that have been disproportionately affected by historical injustices. Education and awareness, promoting education about the history of slavery, its lasting impacts, and the contributions of African Americans to foster a more. The goals of reparations are to rectify the injustices of the past, promote equality, and foster a more just and inclusive society. On an unforgettable Friday, July 17, the rapper and activist shared a 2-page open letter to the UK insurance giant, demanding that the firm pay reparations to descendants of African slaves for its role in the transatlantic slave trade. Our people have been financially impaired and economically disabled due to the systemic oppression and institutional racism it leaves behind, T.I. captioned an Instagram post featuring the letter. Time to take what we know our ancestors deserved and died for. This came as a result of Lloyd's acknowledgement to its ties to the slave trade and pledge to make amends in June, which included recruiting more black employees and providing financial support to charities that promote diversity and inclusion. But T.I. says that just isn't enough. Your commitment to reparations is an honorable one, but commitment without tangible actions is merely lip service, he writes in the letter. We demand a specific call to action that includes, but is not limited to direct reparations be made to the families who were ripped from their native lands and sold as property while your company profited from the whole shameful endeavor. What's more, T.I. goes on to suggest 4 avenues for reparations. 10% ownership of Lloyd's be given to the descendants of African slaves, accurate annual tracking of those reparations, a $1 million cash loan, with 1% interest, to every African American adult once in their lifetime for the next 200 years, and at least one African American member on its board. The rapper closed his letter by urging Lloyd's to have a comprehensive reparation plan in place by fall of 2020. We have waited long enough and our community deserves real action and much more than empty apologies or platitudes, he writes. Seeing the conscience on a rise this recent times gets us more impressive and optimistic by the day. The Bank of England apologized on Friday for its historic links to slavery and promised to ensure no images of former bank officials who owned slaves or profited from slavery are on display. UK Central Bank had 27 former members, including 11 former bank governors and 16 directors, who owned slaves or profited directly from the slave trade, according to a database maintained by University College London. The bank's announcement had come one day after 2 venerable brand-name British companies, Insurance Exchange Lloyd's of London and the Brewer Green King, announced that they would make reparation payments for the historic role the firms played in slavery. Moreover, a few weeks ago on November 8, 2023, Lloyd's of London has announced it will pay a whopping £52 million in equality initiatives as the world's largest insurance market recognizes the significant role it played in the transatlantic slave trade. The 355-year-old insurance firm, located in the heart of London, unveiled plans to support black and other minority ethnic people in work and education. The company underwrote enslaved people as part of a ship's cargo and previously described the period as shameful. An estimated 3.2 million enslaved African people were transported by Britain's shipping industry. But Lloyd's has resisted calls to pay direct reparations to the descendants of slaves after arguing lack of documentation made it impossible to identify wronged individuals. Research conducted by Johns Hopkins University revealed the capital played a significant role in enabling the slave trade between the 17th and 19th centuries. It also found many individuals working in the insurance marketplace used their own expertise and influence to develop and defend the slavery system. Documents kept in archives even showed several senior figures at Lloyd's were enslavers themselves and absentee owners of slave plantations. Lloyd's chairman Bruce Carnegie Brown said, "I don't think we can undo the wrongs of the past, but we can take action to address the impacts which are still seen today. And racial inequality is one of those impacts in UK society and around the world." Lloyd's culture chief Mark Lomas added, "We're aware that no one can properly atone for the past. But what we have done is set out a framework that we believe will make sustainable change over a long-term period." The insurance marketplace will spend around £12 million supporting the careers of black and ethnically diverse people in insurance. An additional £40 million is being invested to boost growth within communities affected by historical enslavement. However, while it particularly feels relieving to know about this developments in London, the level of reparation affairs is not very similar with that of the US. Discussions about atonement for the enslavement of black Americans has a long history in the United States. Most famously, General William T. Sherman drafted Special Field Order 15 in 1865. The order stipulated that Confederate land seized in Georgia and South Carolina would be split among formerly enslaved black people in those states, no more than 40 acres per family. Black Americans commonly refer to this measure as 40 acres and mule, and it has become a long-standing symbol for both the promise of and pessimism about repayment for slavery, or reparations. Let us get deep into the story of the 40 acres and mule. As the Civil War was winding down 150 years ago, Union leaders gathered a group of black ministers in Savannah, Georgia. The goal was to help the thousands of newly freed slaves. From that meeting came General William T. Sherman's Special Field Order 15. It set aside land along the southeast coast so that each family shall have a plot of not more than 40 acres of tillable ground. That plan later became known by a signature phrase, 40 acres and a mule. After wrapping up his famous march, Sherman spent weeks in Savannah, staying in an ornate Gothic Revival mansion called the Green Meldrum House. That's where he and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton held their meeting with local black leaders. The house is now owned by a local church. Susan Arden Jolie, the site's preservationist and tour guide, leads visitors up a winding staircase. Sherman's memoirs say that he took them upstairs to his quarters. "So that's where we will go," she says. According to Arden Jolie, the meeting took place in a high-ceilinged room on a corner of the second floor. Sherman and Stanton asked the group's leader, the Reverend Garrison Frazier, a series of questions. She reads from Sherman's memoirs, where he quotes minutes from the meeting. Fourth question, state in what manner you would rather live, whether scattered among the whites, or in colonies by yourselves, she reads, continuing with Frazier's answer. I would prefer to live by ourselves, for there is a prejudice against us in the South that will take years to get over. Charles Elmore, a professor emeritus of humanities at Savannah State University, says Sherman and Stanton listened to Frazier and the others. The other men chose this eloquent, 67-year-old imposing black man, who was well over 6 feet tall, to speak on their behalf, Elmore says. And he said essentially we want to be free from domination of white men, we want to be educated, and we want to own land. 4 days later, Sherman signed Field Order 15, setting aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land for freed slaves. Sherman appointed Brig General Rufus Saxton to divide up the land, giving each family up to 40 acres. And it wasn't in the order, Elmore says, but some also received leftover army mules. But it became known as of January 16, 1865, as 40 acres and a mule, Elmore said. Stan Deaton, of the Georgia Historical Society, points out that after Lincoln's assassination, President Andrew Johnson reversed Sherman's order, giving the land back to its former Confederate owners. Once the passion of war was over, the idea of that kind of social experiment lost favor with a lot of people very quickly, he says. Vonette Goodwalker, a writer who leads tours focused on Savannah's black past, calls it one of the biggest gotchas in American history. Here, take this land, but we can't really give it to you because it doesn't belong to us, it belongs to the Confederates when they come back home. How confusing is that? The reversal left many African Americans with few options but to become sharecroppers, often working for former slaveholders. But Elmore says the meeting in Savannah 150 years ago accomplished one important thing. It set in motion the dialogue between the white power structure and black men in Savannah, Georgia, he says. What do you all want? And they got some of it, however temporary and fleetingly. They got it. That is significant. What's more, attempts towards reparations for racial discrimination and slavery has heavily advanced in some places recently. In 2021, Evanston, Illinois, became the first U.S. city to create a reparations plan for its black residents, and California that year set the nation's first state-level reparations task force. In 2022, Harvard University created a $100 million Legacy of Slavery fund to allow scholars and students to examine the university's connections to slavery. Given this enduring history, the survey asked Black Americans to share their views on the impact of slavery on their position in the United States, whether the descendants of enslaved Black people should be repaid for the labor of their ancestors, the forms of repayment that would be most helpful, the institutions or individuals who bear responsibility for repayment, and the likelihood that repayment would occur in their lifetime. Americans view the prospect of reparations mostly negatively, a 2021 Pew Research Center survey found. 3 in 10 U.S. adults say descendants of people enslaved in the U.S. should be repaid in some way, such as given land or money. About 7 in 10, which is 68%, say these descendants should not be repaid. Views of reparations for slavery vary widely by race and ethnicity, especially between Black and white Americans. Around 3/4 of Black adults, that is 77%, say the descendants of people enslaved in the U.S. should be repaid in some way, while 18% of white Americans say the same. There are also notable differences by partisan affiliation. Among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, views are split. 48% say descendants of enslaved people should be repaid in some way, while 49% say they shouldn't be repaid. By comparison, only 8% of Republicans and GOP learners say these descendants should be repaid in some way, and 91% say they should not. When it comes to age, younger adults are more likely than older ones to say the descendants of enslaved people should be repaid. 45% of adults under 30 take this view, compared with 18% of adults 65 and older. When Americans are asked about the legacy of slavery's effect on Black people today, 58% of the overall public says this affects the position of Black people in American society at least a fair amount, with 28% saying it affects them a great deal. 4 in 10 U.S. adults say the legacy of slavery has not much or not at all affected the position of Black Americans in the country today. In the Center's 2021 survey, the 30% of Americans who favored reparations were also asked about the institutions and individuals who bear responsibility for repayment. They were presented with 4 options: the U.S. federal government, businesses and banks that profited from slavery, colleges and universities that benefited from slavery, and descendants of families who engaged in the slave trade. 3/4 of reparations supporters say the federal government has all or most of the responsibility to repay descendants of enslaved people. A smaller share, though still a majority, say businesses and banks that profited from slavery. About 65% have all or most of the responsibility. Fewer say the same about colleges and universities that benefited from slavery. 53%, and descendants of families who engaged in the slave trade, 44%. Reparations supporters were also asked how helpful the following forms of repayment would be: educational scholarships, financial assistance for starting or improving a business, financial assistance for buying or remodeling a home, and cash payments. These adults are most likely to say educational scholarships would be very or extremely helpful, 82%, followed by financial assistance with businesses, 75%, 73% financial assistance with home buying or remodeling, and cash payments, 57%. Missouri Democratic Representative Cori Bush has introduced new legislation calling for $14 trillion in reparations for Black Americans, in an effort to see the federal government atone for the practice of chattel slavery and hundreds of years of racist policies that followed. The United States has a moral and legal obligation to provide reparations for the enslavement of Africans and its lasting harm on the lives of millions of Black people, Bush said in a Wednesday news conference attended by Representatives Barbara Lee, Democrat California, and Jamal Bowman, Democrat New York, as well as other stakeholders. America must provide reparations if we desire a prosperous future for all, Bush said. Her resolution is the latest in a long line of congressional efforts by Democrats to compensate Black Americans for centuries of racial inequity. Similar language about reparations has been introduced in every legislative session since 1989. We know that we continue to live under slavery's vestiges. We know how slavery has perpetuated Jim Crow. We know how slavery's impacts live on today, Bush said, citing the racial wealth gap, voter suppression, infant mortality rates, and other negative health outcomes for Black people. It's unjust and it wouldn't happen in a just and fair and equitable society, she said. Those are not the natural consequences of human society. They are directly caused by our federal government's role in the enslavement and exploitation of Africans and black people throughout our history. While the conversation around reparations has picked up traction in recent years, with about a dozen cities and the state of California considering reparation programs, the concept remains broadly unpopular with Americans. About 3/4 or more of white adults oppose reparations, and so do a majority of Latinos and Asian Americans. Black Americans overwhelmingly support the proposal, and young people in general are more likely to support cash payments to the descendants of enslaved people than their older counterparts. But more than 90% of Republicans say they oppose it, while Democrats are split nearly 50-50 on whether descendants should receive compensation. Bills introduced in the House and Senate would create a commission to address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 American colonies between 1619 and 1865, and the racial and economic discrimination against black Americans that followed. Such a commission, the bills say, would consider a national apology and proposals for reparations. Some of the leading voices on the matter, both for and against, have a personal connection to the issue. They have one or more ancestors who were slaveholders. Among them are 3 prominent Democrats who have co-sponsored reparations bills, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Chris Van Hollen, and Representative Lloyd Doggett. Opponents include Republican Senators Tommy Tuberville and John N. Kennedy, and former Representative Louis Gohmert. The issue is divisive. A Reuters Ipsos survey found that slightly more than half of respondents identifying as Democrats, 58%, support reparations. Just 18% of Republicans do. The divide is even greater between black and white America. The poll found that 74% of black Americans favor reparations compared to just 26% of white Americans. A House resolution introduced in May in favor of the idea cites estimates from respected economists that reparations to eliminate the racial wealth gap would cost at least $14 trillion. Proponents say such payments are meant to help compensate for more than slavery itself. They cite systemic racism and other forms of discrimination that followed emancipation. Opponents say reparations would further divide the country. They question who would get the money. Would all black Americans, or only descendants of people who could, show that their ancestors were enslaved? They also say it's wrong to have taxpayers finance reparations, given that no one alive today is responsible for slavery. In examining the genealogies of members of the 117th Congress, Reuters found that at least 100 lawmakers have direct ancestors who enslaved black people in the years before 1865, the end of the U.S. Civil War. Some have espoused strong positions on reparations. As a Republican member of the House Judiciary Committee, Gohmert was one of the most vocal critics of long-standing House Resolution 40, which calls for Congress to form a commission to study reparations. In April 2021, Gohmert went on the attack by proposing an amendment calling for the Democratic Party to pay for reparations. In the slavery era, the Democratic Party supported slavery. The Republican Party, led by Abraham Lincoln, called for slavery's restriction and eventually abolished it. At the time, Gohmert suggested his own family had no connection to slavery, citing an ancestor who immigrated after the Civil War. I have seen the documents where my great-grandfather signed when he came from Europe in 1870, he said. Reuters found that Gohmert has another direct ancestor, on his mother's side, who enslaved 11 black people in Bowie County, Texas, in 1860. Those enslaved by Gohmert's ancestor, Robert Lindsay, ranged in age from a 3-month-old boy to a 70-year-old man. Lindsay was a lawyer who, shortly before his death in 1860, chaired a meeting that organized a vigilance committee in the community of Boston in Bowie County. It issued a statement resolving that any white man caught tampering with our slaves to bring about an insurrection would be caught and killed by the committee. Gohmert, who joined Congress in 2005 but did not seek re-election last year, told Reuters he wasn't aware of having a slaveholding ancestor. "That surprises me," he said. He declined to comment further. At a Republican rally in Nevada last October, Tuberville, an Alabama senator, took aim at Democrats for being soft on crime. In his critique, he veered into the issue of reparations and implied that those who commit crime in America are black. They want crime because they want to take over what you got, Tuberville said of Democrats. They want to control what you have. They want reparations because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bullshit. They are not owed that. In a statement to local media about his controversial remarks, Tuberville said, "In part, the issue is crime, not race, but the liberal media is intent on helping Democrats remain in power." The statement did not address his claims about reparations. An ancestor of Tuberville, Valentine Brazil, in 1840 enslaved at least 5 black people in Saline County, Arkansas, including 2 boys under the age of 10. Brazil moved to another county in the state, Washita, and by the next census count in 1850 enslaved 3 people between the ages of 17 and 22 years old. Tuberville did not respond to 5 requests for comment. In 2019, a reporter asked Kennedy, a Republican senator from Louisiana, about his thoughts on reparations. "Slavery was reprehensible," Kennedy said. He added, "I believe in personal responsibility, and I just don't think someone today is responsible for what someone else did 150 years ago." Kennedy is a direct descendant of a man named Nathan Calhoun who in 1860 enslaved 65 people. They lived in 14 slave houses on his farm in Abbeville, South Carolina. Nathan Calhoun's son, Dabney P. Calhoun, enslaved 22 people that same year in Louisiana. Kennedy did not respond to 5 requests for comment. Warren, a Massachusetts Democrat, is a co-sponsor of S-40, the Senate Reparations Bill. In an 1848 will, a Warren ancestor named John Crawford bequeathed the 14 men, women, and children enslaved in Dorchester County, Maryland. For 12 of them, ranging in age from a 4-month-old infant girl to a 28-year-old woman, Crawford specified that each female would be freed at age 31, and each male at 36. For 2 other men named in the document, Crawford wrote that they would be slaves for life. The legacy of slavery still casts a long shadow over every facet of American life, including Congress, Warren said in a statement to Reuters. "While we cannot change the past, I am fighting in the Senate to address systemic injustices, through word, deed, law and policy." In conclusion, the issue of reparations is a complex and important topic that seeks to address the historical injustices and ongoing disparities faced by marginalized communities, particularly the descendants of enslaved Africans. It acknowledges the unpaid labor and contributions of those who built the foundation of nations but were denied their share of the benefits. Reparations are not simply about financial compensation, but also about acknowledging the immeasurable harms of the past, promoting healing, and working towards a more just and equitable society. That being said, we have come to the end of this video. Hope you had a great time. We are patiently waiting for your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you.